My guest today is Adam Fortuna. Adam is a software developer who blogs at the website minify.com, where he aims to help millennials reach financial independence through personal finance tools and content. After spending his early career teaching people how to code, Adam, who is now early retired, spends his time these days helping other early career investors grow their personal finances using minimalist strategies. He currently lives in Salt Lake City, and I invited Adam to the podcast today to share his story and insights about retiring early from an engineering career. Adam, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, so I'd love to start out just helping our audience orient a little bit. What year did you early retire, and how old were you at the time?
So I left my job back in 2018, December of 2018, and I was 36 years old at the time. So just almost 2 years ago.
Gotcha. Help us understand like what your career path was before retiring. What were you doing sort of at each step of the way, and what was your most recent job?
Yeah. So I went to college for computer science, but then I was really bad at math. So I ended up going down to like MIS and kind of ending with an IT career major after like just bouncing around careers. And then after college, I really just got into web development. And that was pretty much my entire career from the moment I graduated until I retired, some form of web development. That started off as a kind of a software developer, Cold Fusion, JavaScript, Java, that kind of thing. And kind of as the years went on, I kind of got really into this like a startup culture. And right around 2008-ish, 2009-ish, I was like kind of in a lucky place where I was early in my 20s and Ruby on Rails was getting real popular. And I started learning it with like every spare second I had, and was fortunate to join a startup around that time as a Ruby on Rails developer. And yeah, from then it was a software developer and then like technical director. And then towards the end, I kind of switched over to like a product director, product manager kind of role, but always around building websites.
Gotcha. What kind of websites were you building? Consumer web, enterprise?
Uh, for the last couple of years, it was a startup called Code School, and so it was a startup that focused on teaching people how to code in the browser. So people would like maybe watch a video and then do some challenges in the browser where they're entering code to solve a problem, and we're like checking their code behind the scenes and seeing if it validates and does everything it needs to.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So when did you decide that you wanted to retire early? And was there a single moment where you realized that, or was it a gradual realization? Help us kind of understand that process that you went through.
Yeah. So I think for me, there were like two kind of key moments. Uh, the first one was kind of off of a very sad and kind of dark time in my life. It was like right after I graduated college, my mom passed away.
Mm,
And I spent pretty much the next year of my life just emotionally and financially and physically dealing with everything that comes from that, especially when you're the only child of a divorced family. You're kind of handling everything,
mm.
and so that was kind of what kind of got me into investing, got me to learn about all these things. But even more than that, it kind of made me realize, like, you know, my mom passed away at like age 54, a year after she retired, and it made me realize, like, I want to have more time in retirement than my mom did with 1 year. And so that was kind of the first one. Um, the second part was probably 7 years later. I was, investing and just working and just doing kind of the bare minimum to grow wealth that somebody does when they don't really know much about it. And I found Mr. Money Mustache's Shockingly Simple article. And that kind of gave me kind of almost like a finish line of how much money I would potentially need. I think before that, I'd always just assumed like, oh, I'll just kind of keep working forever. I know I want to retire at some point earlier than my mom was able to, but I didn't really have a framework for how to do that. So kind of understanding that like 25x mentality and kind of how investments play into how much you need kind of helped fill in the gaps.
Gotcha. Yeah, wow. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm sorry for your loss right at so soon, right after graduation, and so young for your mom, right after she retired. It sounds like you parlayed that into really digging and understanding personal finance a lot better, which helped you, hopefully contribute to getting to where you are now. What was the life that you envisioned having in retirement after, before you had reached that point? What did you envision early retirement being like for you?
I think for me, it was mostly around having time to, well, for one, travel. I mean, everyone. I don't know anyone who doesn't like to travel. For me, that would look like maybe 3 months out of the year traveling somewhere and still having like a home base. But for that other 9 months out of the year, it means having pretty much unlimited time to work on personal projects that just I enjoy and like just feed my soul. And for me, that's a lot of like coding projects that really serve no financial purpose. And most people would say don't serve any purpose, but they're fun to do. And it could be as simple as going through a tutorial and learning something. And then maybe the next day trying to make something to share on Reddit. But really just having that time to experiment and explore things that I enjoy.
Got it. So you mentioned that when you stumbled across the Mr. Money Mustache article, Shockingly Simple Math Behind Early Retirement, that helped at least make it concrete and start to give you a framework. Was there a specific date in mind that you had after that point where you knew you wanted to fire, or a specific savings target that you decided you needed to hit for yourself?
Yeah, that ended up kind of going down the rabbit hole of running all the numbers and trying to figure it all out. And for my situation, I kind of got kickstarted after my mom passed away and left me about $100,000, and that's like a world changing amount of money when you're young. And I was I was fortunate to go to a state school mostly on scholarships, so I was able to just kind of figure out like how do I not mess this up. And so I had been investing really just with like Vanguard index funds for a couple of years by the time I read that article. And when I ran the numbers on it, I'm like, well, I was about 30 years old at the time. And I thought, hey, if I continue investing like 30%, 40% of my net worth or of my yearly income, maybe I can retire early around like 45, 48. And so initially, those were kind of what I was going for. I'm like, I'm not gonna try to like max this out and save like 70% of my income. Like I know some people are able to, but more like take it a slow path to fire. And I was fortunate enough to end up with some windfalls that ended up even speeding it up even more.
Got it. Things that others can replicate, or that were very personal to your situation?
Well, in this case, it was the startup I was at was acquired, and so I was able to get, you know, a windfall from that. So as soon as that happened, I was like, okay, maybe instead of 48, maybe this is more like 42. And then the company that acquired us ended up going public. And then it was like, maybe instead of 42, this is like, I could do this today if I wanted to. And it was pretty much like 6 months after the company went public, I was like, okay, well, I can continue working here or I can, go off and do my own thing. And that ended up being a perfect time to take a break.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. How did you come up with uh, your precise fire number? What were the considerations that went into it? And like, how did you calculate the budget or burn rate that you would need to live on? You kind of mentioned a moment ago that you wanted to travel in retirement and work on personal projects. How did you factor things like travel and accommodation, unexpected expenses, buffer, etc.?
So initially, I'd been tracking my uh, yearly spending every year. So I kind of had a good baseline for how much we were spending when we started doing these numbers. And so I was able to kind of just look at last year, multiply that by 25, and kind of get a naive estimate. Like, if I just keep doing what I'm doing right now, that's how much it'll be. But then I started doing something called, I think it's called like uh, a PERT evaluation, like performance program evaluation and review technique.
Hmm.
It's this thing where you take like the amount you think you're going to spend, multiply it by 4, and then take the low end of how much you're going to spend, add that, and then the high end of what you're going to spend, and add that, all those together and divide it by 6. So it's kind of like it's a weighted proportion of your average, your high, and your low. So using that model, we kind of like ran out like how much would we spend on our high end financial independence. Like, let's say we travel a ton, we, go skiing every year, we give a ton to charity, we support family. Like, what does that number look like? And then the low end, like, what if we don't travel at all? Like, what if we're just homebodies and just make all of our food from Costco for the year? And so we kind of took those 3 numbers and came up with this estimate of kind of what our yearly spending would be like going forward, and kind of use that as the baseline for the 25x.
Gotcha. Is the PERT evaluation? I hadn't heard of that in like um, fire blogs or the community before. Is that something that folks in the fire community are talking about, or is that from another discipline? How did you come across that?
Yeah, it's mostly something used that like project managers would use to like schedule out like the time of projects. So as you're like talking with your developers and you're saying like how much time is it going to take to do this, they normally people aren't going to say like, oh, it's going to take 4 hours. They're going to say it's going to take somewhere between 2 and 10 hours or 2 and 20 hours, but it'll probably take somewhere around 10. And so it's that kind of same technique, but applying it to fire.
Gotcha. Okay, that's pretty clever. Um, so it sounded like you had some sort of stock compensation or stock option windfalls that helped accelerate your retirement date. How did you, I guess, stay focused on that goal when I imagine many of your colleagues with their own windfalls probably started, upgrading their lifestyles, maybe buying homes or cars, while you had this fire goal? How did you, I guess, keep your head on straight and not get distracted by other things?
uh, I think part of it's that I made a lot of those mistakes really early on. And so I wasn't making them later when I had that money. Like, for instance, I bought a house in 2006 in Florida right before the housing market crashed. So, I sold that house 12 years later, and it was still down 20% from what I bought it for. So I kind of, uh, I kind of had like this different outlook on like what the value of a home was for me. And since then, I've been very much in the apartment only camp.
Got it. The home you bought in '06, was that meant to be a primary residence or like an investment rental property?
It was a primary residence. Yeah, at that time, I was completely unaware of like all of the real estate jargon around like cap rate and like how much could I rent this out if I wanted to compared to how much the mortgage is going to be. Those are things that I would definitely look at now if I was buying a house. But at the time, I'm like, ooh, this house is pretty and I love it. I'm going to buy it. And yeah, it was definitely a costly financial decision.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So during this period in which you were, accumulating, saving, investing, and getting your startup windfalls, what proportion of your savings were going into different type of accounts like tax deferred, tax exempt, taxable accounts, and as you were accumulating, and then by the time you retired, what was the proportion in each bucket?
Yeah. So one of the things that was very fortunate was the startup I was working for, Code School. They they paid very fairly for a startup. I know one of the common things is that there's this trade off between like high equity and high or like low compensation, high equity. Um, we're very fortunate that like code school never took funding from anyone. It was 100% owned by the employees, and it was still able to pay a decent salary. So because of that, most of the career, I was still saving somewhere between 20% and 50% of my salary every year, mostly just maxing out 401k and Roth IRA, and then putting a little bit into brokerage account. For the first couple of years, we didn't even have a 401k because it was a startup. So it was just putting a lot of money into brokerage account. And so by the time I kind of left the job after the acquisition, it was in a very unusual state from what I read on most fire blogs, where probably 85% of my investable cash was in an after-tax brokerage account. Only 15% was in like a 401k or a Roth. So all of these techniques, like backdoor or like a Roth IRA ladder, or things that you would use to access a 401k early, I kind of am able to, fortunately, not look into those too much and just focus on the brokerage account withdrawal side.
Got it. So yeah, it sounds like 85 brokerage, 15 tax advantage by the time you retired.
Right.
Gotcha. What were you investing in? Like passive index funds, stocks, bonds individually?
I am very much in like the minimal investor camp, where keep it as simple as possible. So pretty much everything is in either a VTSAX total US market, like a VTIAX total international market, or like VBTLX, like a total bond market fund. So pretty much everything is that, aside from I put like 5% in real estate investment trusts because I don't own a home. So it's kind of leaning towards that. I think if I owned a home, I might not do that. And then I also put like 5% of the total portfolio into, I consider it like speculative investments, pretty much whatever I want. And at the moment, that's still holding some company stock from my past employer.
Got it. So is it fair to say that you were basically constructing a sort of a Boglehead style 3-fund portfolio?
Yeah, exactly. I'm a big fan of the Bogleheads.
Was it how did you allocate between the three classes?
Mostly, I did about like 20% bonds, and then of the remaining, 2/3 US, 1/3 international.
Gotcha. Cool. So when you finally pulled the trigger, how much did you have saved up?
So the funny story about having a lot of money in a company stock is that number changes drastically. So I have a graph of like the stock performance for my net worth, and like the day I gave notice, it's at its all-time high. And then it of about like 2.6 million. And then when I finally left my job, like 3 months later, because I ended up giving 3 months notice, it was about like 1.8 million.
Wow, that's a pretty steep drop. Did that cause you to reconsider?
uh, Luckily, no. I think it probably would have, but I was still kind of in the mindset like, oh, if something goes wrong, I'll go back to work somewhere else later. And luckily, that was right around that time. If you recall, at the end of 2000 or the end of 2018, there was a big stock market decline, and then it quickly rose back up to where it was after that. So within like 3 more months, it was back up to like 2.3 million.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I remember that time, and luckily the recovery came pretty quickly. Cool.
Yeah.
So when you finally decided to pull the trigger, how did you actually break the news to friends and peers?
Um,
And what was their reaction, importantly?
so one of the funny things is that um, I blog non-anonymously, so I'm like publicly out there. I've even given talks, or I'd given talks to my company, like our local team, about like how to invest, even like some basic numbers, like shockingly simple math numbers. So people were kind of aware that I was at some point probably going to leave. So it didn't really come as a shock to anyone. Uh, when I did tell my manager, uh, she was she was very happy. She's like, "Oh, are you firing?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Oh, that's awesome." So it was a very positive environment, and that was one of the reasons why I gave 3 months notice.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. That's pretty fortunate. Sometimes I know when breaking the news to friends and family, there can be some head scratching or even pushback. So it's good to hear. It's heartening to hear that folks were supportive. So I remember reading your job exit blog post that you wrote about leaving your job, and in the post you mentioned that you read through the Financial Samurai's book, another personal finance blogger that I guess we both follow. He wrote a book, How to Engineer Your Layoff, which is all about like how to negotiate, a good severance package, etc. And it sounded like that helped you to come up with some ideas about how to have the conversation with your own employer, and that there were maybe some helpful strategies that you had learned on, how to balance the, negotiation between walking away potentially with some severance and maintaining good relations at your employer. And I was just curious, like, what were some of the key lessons or takeaways that you learned in the book that helped you prepare your exit conversations with your employer?
The funny thing is, so that book's all around, like you said, kind of how to have those conversations when you leave and how to be prepared, and maybe even how to get a little bit more when you leave. That could be them paying for health insurance for a while. That could be, uh, you know, some kind of ongoing consulting fee if you want to like come back and like, help things out for the next couple months or something, and a bunch of other techniques. And the more I read that book, the more I was clear. I just wanted a clean break. And so mostly the thing that stood out was around like you can either try to optimize for money when you leave or optimize for relationships when you leave. And I kind of decided to optimize for relationships. So I didn't really end up, um, you know, um, putting my employer on the line for anything. I think if I had more of an adversarial relationship with them, I would have. That's not a dig at anyone who tries for it. I think it's in people's best interest to get the most when they leave. But in my case, I was kind of in a financial position where I didn't need to.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So you mentioned that one of the things that you really looked forward to doing in early retirement was just travel a lot. And I was just curious, like, what are some of the most memorable places that you've traveled to since you fired, and what made them memorable?
Yeah, well, as you probably know, this year in 2020, travel isn't quite as big a thing. We had planned a almost month long trip to Taiwan and South Korea, and luckily South Korea was like the one of the very first countries to close their borders, so we were able to get like full reimbursement on that trip. But fortunately, in the first year, we were able to do quite a bit. Um, we I think this was actually before I left, but we went to Southeast Asia. I went to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia for a couple weeks, and that was an amazing trip that I definitely want to go back. I was just amazed by the culture and the people, and I think that would be a fun place to just like spend a month, just explore Angkor Wat or uh, you know travel around and eat my way through the whole area.
Cool. You mentioned earlier that you um, you got a lot of ideas when you were reading the shockingly simple math post that on the Mr. Money Mustache blog. And I was just curious, like, now in early retirement, I know it hasn't been too long, but you've officially crossed over. What is your approach for determining how much you can afford to withdraw every year, so that you feel confident that you're going to outlast your savings? Do you do a pretty straightforward application of the 4% rule, or are there any nuances that you apply when determining how much to withdraw for the year?
Yeah, I think initially we were planning on just keeping it simple and trying to stay under 4% as like a yearly thing. Uh, I think that's still kind of our loose guidance. That's kind of attempting to keep it closer to about 3.5%. But on a month to month basis, one of the things I do is I just track all of our expenses using Tiller to a Google Sheet. And yeah, Tiller is really handy.
What is that?
So Tiller it's something kind of like Mint or Personal Capital. Connects with all of your different like credit cards and that kind of thing. And Tiller is kind of unique in that it pulls all of that data straight into a Google Sheet. So that Google Sheet is like, all of my transactions with another tab for like the expenses. And then I add some other tabs that I've created that combine things. So one of the things on that sheet is a uh, trailing 6-month withdrawal rate and a trailing 3-month withdrawal rate. And if that ends up going higher than 4%, then I know like something's really a problem and I need to, double down and maybe see if I can cut some spending.
Got it. So it sounds like you have a heuristic of don't go over 4%, but then there's also an additional approach where you try to actually just push it closer to 3.5%. Is that fair to say?
Right. And looking at it with that last 3 months as kind of a canary in the coal mine for, am I on a good pace for the year or do I need to make some changes?
Got it. So a moment ago we were talking about how 2020's thrown some plans awry because it's just harder to travel. Has the coronavirus altered your plans in any way when it comes to fire, or pretty much business as usual?
Pretty much business as usual. Certainly in a very fortunate spot for it. Like we've been having like weekly chats with a bunch of our friends, and it's a hard time right now. Like we're like extremely fortunate to be where we are right now during this time. I I I see people like having to stress out about jobs and working from home and teaching kids. We're child free ourselves, so that's not a part of what we're doing. But there's a lot of things going on right now, and I think for us, we've just been my wife and I staying at home with our dog. That's pretty much been it.
Got it. By the way, when you were planning, still in the accumulation phase for fire, planning for fire, how did you think about health insurance and healthcare, and what do you do for health insurance right now?
Yeah, that was always a big question. Like we were originally in Florida, and so we were shopping around on healthcare.gov to kind of price out how much different insurance plans would be after we both left our jobs. Um, for the first year that I was not working, my wife was working, so we were able to just use her insurance. And then at the beginning of this year, in January, she left her job, and that was when we made the switch to the healthcare.gov marketplace. And that process ended up being really, really smooth and surprisingly easy for us to get insurance through there. Now, easy doesn't mean cheap. It ends up being somewhere between, I think we priced it out around $700 for like a bronze plan, which is basically a high deductible plan, up to I think it was somewhere around $2,000 or maybe even more for like a gold or a platinum plan per month. And yeah.
Wow. Don't you get a subsidy given that you're not working?
So the subsidy is there's a really good article on this on Root of Goods blog. It's all around how much income you're taking in, and that determines the amount of a rebate. So one of the key points is right around 64,000. If you're making less than that, that is the amount you're filing on your taxes from capital gains, income, dividends, all of this is under 64,000, then you can get about a $350 a month rebate. So in this case, that rebate is just lowers the price every month. So it's not like a rebate at the end of the year. It's lowering how much you pay, lowering how much you pay every month. So that kind of lowered our health insurance costs from $700 a month to about $350 a month.
Got it. Yeah, which I guess for two people, it's still fairly reasonable. Hopefully you don't have to use it. Got it. Okay, cool. So when you think about the career life paths of colleagues or classmates or peers, um, who are still working, they still maybe have the comforts of a stable salary, notwithstanding everything that's going on right now. How do you not let what they're doing, whatever successes they may be having, whatever pretty Instagram lives they may be living, get to your head? Is that ever something you grapple with post retirement?
I think maybe me of 10 years probably would have. I think one of the things I started doing the last couple of years was when I kind of moved from like software developer into like more management side, spending a lot of time learning more about just I had to say like just feelings in general, but like a lot of personal work on myself, personal work on how to grow a team, and a lot of that ends up with some of this self growth around celebrating others' successes and being more supportive in general. And I think some of those takeaways now are when I see people having that success in their own lives, I'm just like so happy for them. And uh, there's always a point of like, or there's sometimes a point of like, oh man, that would be fun to try. Or it has a bit of almost like an excitement to spur something else for me to try. But I consider that a good takeaway from it rather than a negative one.
Cool. By the way, you mentioned that you were in Florida at the time. Were you in Florida when you pulled the trigger and early retired
I was out here in Salt Lake.
in
It
Salt
was
Lake?
about a year after I moved out here.
Got it. And I was just curious, like, was your decision to move out to Salt Lake part of the FIRE plan, or was that decision made for other reasons?
It was made for other reasons. Yeah, the company that acquired us kind of offered me to move out here and help pay for all of it. So yeah, it ended up being a good time. And my wife's company was also opening up an office out here, so she was able to move with her job. And it's kind of funny because if we had stayed in Florida, we probably would have saved like I don't know, $50,000 to $100,000 in taxes.
Yeah,
After
no state income tax in
yeah,
Florida. Yeah,
and at the time we had no idea that the company was going to go public. I think if we had known that, we might have stayed for one more year just to take advantage of those kind of free capital gains on income taxes.
for sure. Okay, cool. What adventures on your bucket list are, kind of in your future now that you're early retired, whether it involves traveling or whether it involves pet projects at home, that we should keep tabs on?
uh, yeah, one of the things I'm working on now is really turning Minify into this kind of, I'm thinking of it like a code school for learning how to invest for people that are just getting into it, learning how to create their own asset allocation, how to evaluate the funds in their 401k. The last couple of days, I've been just pulling data from like stock market APIs to create like a fund directory of mutual funds on Minify. And that's been a fun side project and programming project in Ruby. Um, yeah,
Cool. Is your goal with Minify to build tools to provide like content equally both? What is your I guess what's the goal?
yeah. The goal is mostly around tools, articles to help people learn how to invest confidently on their own. And I think one of the special areas that I enjoy making content for that is interactive tools, ones that where people can enter in their numbers and the articles change, or it gives them feedback on their specific situations.
Got it. Awesome. Well, Adam, this has been a real treat. I've enjoyed chatting with you. Where can listeners find out more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, if you head over to minify.com, it's MINAFI. And yeah, if you want to check out the interactive guide to FIRE, it's an article just like the one I was talking about where you put in your numbers and it gives you your kind of plan forward and timeline of when you could reach financial independence.
Cool. We'll make sure we link to all that stuff in the show notes. Also link to the tool that you mentioned. I think it was called Tiller.
Tiller,
Folks
yeah.
can check that out. And yeah, I look forward to sharing this with our audience. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Cheers. Take care.